Morgan Freeman adjusted the strap of his worn backpack, his steps deliberate as he approached the first-class check-in counter. Exhaustion clung to him like a second skin after weeks of filming, but he forced a polite smile. The attendant's hesitation was subtle but stung, a brief flicker of doubt as she scrutinized his ticket. He handed over his ID without a word, feeling a twinge of irritation creep in. At the security checkpoint, the sensation deepened. The agent's gaze lingered too long, and soon he was being directed to a secondary inspection. Morgan complied, his movements steady but tight. His jaw clenched against the growing frustration. He told himself it was nothing, just procedure. By the time he boarded the plane, a quiet unease churned in his chest. A gate agent motioned him toward the economy line, and he calmly corrected them, showing his first-class ticket again. Yet, as he settled into his seat, the whispers around him became impossible to ignore. His fingers tightened on the armrest when a flight attendant appeared, her expression apologetic but firm as she questioned his ticket's authenticity. Morgan's voice remained measured as he explained, but a flush of anger simmered beneath the surface. When security was summoned, humiliation struck like a blow. He stood slowly, every movement controlled, and walked off the plane with his head held high, though inside, the sting of indignity and disbelief was overwhelming. The video of Morgan Freeman being escorted off the plane spread like wildfire. Within hours, headlines dominated social media, accompanied by shaky footage capturing the moment. A legendary actor, his expression stoic, surrounded by airline staff. Comments flooded in, a storm of outrage and disbelief. How could this happen to Morgan Freeman of all people? One user wrote. The hashtag Respect Morgan trended worldwide. News anchors dissected the incident, while fans and public figures voiced their support. Celebrities like Viola Davis and Denzel Washington called out systemic bias in the industry and beyond, amplifying the narrative of an unjust world that even icons couldn't escape. The airline's initial statement, cold and procedural, only fanned the flames. People demanded accountability, boycotts were organized, and protests sparked at major airports. A campaign emerged, urging companies to reevaluate their training and policies. Amid the chaos, Morgan stayed silent. His face, though calm in the press photos, carried a weight that resonated with millions. The world waited, holding its breath, for his response. Days after the incident, Morgan Freeman broke his silence with a heartfelt video posted on his social media accounts. Sitting in a warmly lit study, surrounded by books and personal mementos, he addressed the world with his signature calm yet commanding voice. I've always believed in the power of understanding and dialogue, he began. His eyes steady but shadowed with emotion. What happened on that flight was a reflection of deeper issues that go far beyond me. He recounted the events not as an attack but as a moment that revealed the persistence of biases that countless others face daily. I'm one man with a platform, he said, his voice thick with sincerity. But there are many without one, who endure this silently, without the world taking notice. Morgan's words weren't just an appeal for change, they were a call to action. He announced that he would work alongside advocacy groups to promote awareness and training to combat systemic bias. The video went viral within hours, drawing praise for his grace and poise. Even those initially critical softened in the face of his measured response. As the clip circulated, it shifted the conversation from outrage to reflection, reminding the world that true change begins not with anger, but with understanding. A month after the incident, Morgan Freeman stepped onto a modest stage in a sunlit community center to officially launch the Equity Horizons Foundation. The event was intimate yet brimming with energy, as activists, educators, and community leaders gathered in support. Dressed in a simple gray suit, Morgan addressed the audience with the same calm resolve that had earned him admiration worldwide. Equity Horizons is not just a response to what happened, he began, his deep voice carrying weight and warmth. It's a commitment to ensuring no one has to endure what I, and so many others, have faced. This is about education, empathy, and action. The Foundation's mission was ambitious: to provide anti-bias training in workplaces, offer scholarships for marginalized students, and fund grassroots organizations working toward systemic change. Morgan personally pledged a significant portion of his wealth to the initiative, underscoring his dedication. As applause erupted, Morgan took a moment to reflect. He locked eyes with a young attendee in the crowd, a girl clutching a notebook adorned with inspirational quotes. Her hopeful smile reminded him of the Foundation's true purpose: to inspire a better future, one where equity wasn't a distant dream, but a tangible reality. In the days that followed, the Foundation garnered widespread support, cementing Morgan's role not just as a storyteller, but as a catalyst for change. As the Foundation gained momentum, it became clear that Morgan's efforts were starting to ripple through the industry. Major airlines, recognizing the growing public pressure and the continued backlash from the media, began to take swift action. Horizon Airways, the airline at the heart of Morgan's confrontation, announced sweeping changes to its policies, implementing mandatory anti-discrimination and diversity training for all staff members, from ticket agents to pilots. Other carriers soon followed suit, revamping their procedures for handling complaints and ensuring that racial profiling was actively addressed. In the corporate boardrooms, executives who once resisted Morgan's call for change were now scrambling to catch up. Pressure from both consumers and activists led to a shift in priorities. Diversity, equity, and inclusion became buzzwords, but this time they were being backed by tangible actions. Morgan, however, remained cautious. He knew that change in policy was one thing, but real transformation required a shift in the culture. He continued to speak out, demanding that companies not only revise their codes of conduct but ensure that the changes were enforced at every level. His foundation's online platform, where people could report discrimination, became a vital tool in holding companies accountable. Despite the initial resistance, the momentum was undeniable. Stories of employees being trained to handle diverse passengers with respect, of marginalized travelers no longer feeling out of place in luxury spaces, began to surface. The industry, once entrenched in its old ways, was slowly adapting. The public was watching closely, and Morgan, ever vigilant, knew this was just the beginning. He refused to let the changes be superficial. There would be no turning back. The public's response to the industry's changes was a mixture of cautious optimism and continued skepticism. While many praised the swift actions taken by the airlines and companies, there was also a growing sense that this was just a first step, one that needed to be built upon if real, lasting change was to be achieved. Social media buzzed with discussions, some applauding the new policies, while others voiced their doubts, wondering if these were merely symbolic gestures meant to quell the anger without addressing the underlying issues. For many marginalized travelers, Morgan's fight had sparked hope. They shared stories of feeling seen for the first time in an industry that had often overlooked them. Passengers who had previously encountered microaggressions or blatant racism in airports and on flights now felt emboldened to speak out, knowing that their voices would be heard and their complaints taken seriously. Hashtags supporting Morgan's cause trended on various platforms, with people from all walks of life expressing solidarity. However, there was also backlash from certain corners. Some critics, particularly those who felt that the changes were being forced upon an unwilling industry, argued that the new policies were unnecessary or divisive. They claimed that efforts to address racial issues in travel were a distraction from more pressing matters, such as flight delays or rising ticket prices. But even as these voices persisted, they were drowned out by the broader movement, one that had been ignited by Morgan's courage and resilience. As the conversation continued to evolve, it was clear that the travel industry was at a crossroads. The changes sparked by Morgan's foundation were a pivotal moment in the larger battle for racial justice, not just in aviation, but in many other sectors as well. The world was watching, and both supporters and detractors knew that the fight was far from over. The cultural shift triggered by Morgan's efforts reverberated far beyond the travel industry. Her actions prompted a re-evaluation of long-standing norms, not only in aviation but in countless other spaces where inequality had been quietly accepted. For many, the changes in the industry served as a wake-up call to the pervasive nature of systemic bias and the urgent need for collective action. Conversations about race, equity, and privilege gained unprecedented momentum, becoming topics discussed not just in boardrooms but in everyday interactions. At the heart of this cultural transformation was the realization that progress required more than just policy changes. It required a shift in mindset. Companies, institutions, and individuals began to question their own biases and examine how those biases played out in their decision-making, hiring practices, and customer service. Diversity training, once seen as a box to check, took on greater significance, and organizations began to invest more genuinely in fostering inclusive cultures. The cultural shift also rippled through media, with a greater focus on representation. Television, film, and advertising saw an increase in diverse voices and narratives, while influencers and activists used their platforms to spotlight issues of racial injustice and advocate for long-term solutions. People began to demand that their favorite brands and celebrities take visible stances on social issues, holding them accountable for aligning with values of equality and fairness. In communities across the globe, Morgan's influence inspired a new generation of activists who saw themselves in her journey. They took to the streets, started conversations, and built organizations that continued to challenge the status quo. It was clear that the change Morgan had sparked was not fleeting. It was part of a broader cultural awakening that would leave a lasting impact for years to come. Morgan's commitment to advocacy did not stop with the initial changes she had set in motion. As the momentum of her campaign continued, she remained a steadfast voice for marginalized communities, using her platform to amplify causes that were often overlooked. She tirelessly spoke out against injustices, both big and small, and worked with lawmakers, educators, and grassroots organizations to push for systemic reforms that would create a more equitable society. Her advocacy took many forms, sometimes in the form of public speeches at rallies, other times through intimate roundtable discussions with community leaders. She engaged with young activists, offering mentorship and sharing her own experiences of navigating a world that often sought to silence voices like hers. Morgan also worked closely with policy experts to ensure that the laws and regulations being passed were not only well-intentioned but would actually create tangible, long-lasting changes for those who had been historically disadvantaged. Beyond the travel industry, Morgan's work began to influence various sectors. She pushed for diversity in education curricula, advocating for schools to provide a more inclusive representation of history. She campaigned for better healthcare access in underserved communities and worked with companies to create better work environments for people of all races and backgrounds. Her efforts were not just about making change within a single institution but about building a more just and equal world. Even when faced with setbacks or criticism, Morgan's resolve never wavered. She knew that change was a slow and often painful process, but she also believed deeply that her advocacy was part of a larger movement, one that would eventually shift societal norms and open doors for future generations. The road ahead was long, but Morgan was undeterred. Her advocacy was a lifelong commitment, and she was determined to continue the fight for as long as it took. As the years passed, Morgan's tireless efforts began to shape her legacy in ways she had never imagined. What started as a personal mission to address an injustice in her own industry had blossomed into a widespread movement that transcended boundaries and inspired change in countless sectors. Her work left an indelible mark on the travel industry, making it more inclusive and welcoming to people from all walks of life. But it also left a broader legacy, one that reshaped public perception of activism and the power of individual voices to bring about systemic change. Recognition followed, but it never came in the form of fame or accolades for Morgan herself. Instead, the recognition was reflected in the lasting impact of her work. Policies that were now in place to ensure equal treatment and representation, communities empowered by the programs she championed, and a new generation of leaders who looked to her as a guiding light. Morgan was invited to speak at international forums, her words shaping the conversations at the highest levels of government, business, and culture. Her efforts were lauded by both activists and leaders in the corporate world, who acknowledged her as a catalyst for a profound shift in how institutions viewed diversity and inclusion. Despite the recognition, Morgan remained humble, always redirecting attention back to the cause rather than herself. She believed that her work was just one chapter in a much larger story of collective progress. Her legacy was not just in the tangible changes she had achieved, but in the way she had inspired others to take up the mantle of advocacy and continue pushing for progress. As Morgan reflected on her journey, she found peace in knowing that the fight for justice and equality was far from over, but it was also stronger than ever. Her impact, though immeasurable, was evident in the many lives she had touched and the systems she had helped to transform. And though her work was ongoing, Morgan knew that the foundation she had built would continue to support future generations of advocates, ensuring that the struggle for a fairer, more equitable world would never be in vain. Morgan's journey, marked by both personal and public battles, became a powerful testament to resilience and determination. Over time, her advocacy and the changes she championed left a lasting imprint on society. But beyond the tangible shifts in policy and culture, the most profound aspect of her legacy was the message of hope she instilled in others. Her story wasn't just about fighting against injustice, it was about showing people that change, though often slow and difficult, was possible. It was about encouraging those who felt powerless to stand up and speak out, to believe that their voices mattered. Morgan often shared her own struggles, reminding others that even in moments of doubt and failure, persistence could lead to progress. She became a symbol of what it meant to persevere, to keep pushing for what was right despite the odds. Her message was clear. While the path to a fairer, more inclusive world might be long, each small action taken in the name of justice built towards a better tomorrow. Through her words and her work, Morgan showed that the fight was not just for one individual but for an entire community, an entire world. Morgan's story also carried the powerful reminder that no victory, no matter how small, was insignificant. Each step forward, whether in the courtroom, in public opinion, or in hearts and minds, was a victory for all. Her efforts served as a beacon for future generations, encouraging them to carry the torch of change and continue the work she had begun. In the end, Morgan's legacy was not defined solely by the victories she secured, but by the hope she ignited in others to keep fighting for a better world.